This is a podcast by the News Minute, and you are listening to South Central.
Hello and welcome to South Central, a TNM podcast where we put South at the center. I am Dhanya Rajendran, your host. Joining me in the studio is Pooja Prasanna, co-host, and the person who explains everything, the anchor of Let Me Explain.
Hello, there's so much to explain increasingly.
And in the studio is Leena Reghunath, our co-host, investigative journalist. Leena, you are shifting to Kerala last week in the studio.
Yes.
So you'll be joining us from the Kerala studio, which is your
from
house.
the very hot, humid Kerala from now.
And you'll put a heater in it so you don't have to complain.
That's the last thing you require there.
Also in the studio is Prem Panicker. Prem has been a journalist for 30 years and more. He in fact he was one of the few members who set up Rediff. Then he moved on to Yahoo. He writes for many organizations. And he runs this blog now in which he has written a scathing piece about how the Indian media has covered Operation Sindoor and what happened before and after. Thank you and welcome to the studio.
Thank you, Dhanya, Pooja, Leena. I remember the studio when it was soundproofed with the
Eggshells.
egg crates. So, yeah, good to be back.
Yes.
You've come a long way.
I know. So initially our studio, clearly because we didn't have money to put these panels up, we had these egg crates. Somebody told us that absorbs the noise. So we sat and pasted egg crates and now we have a better studio thanks to our audience because this studio has been completely sponsored through a studio fund and Pooja got her mic. Also. She didn't have a mic for many weeks and people were feeling sympathetic towards her. So yeah, this week we have an interview behind a paywall, which is the first time that Kunal Kamra has appeared on TV, camera, whatever, after the whole row regarding his comedy. So do tune into that. It's a crossover episode of News Laundry Hafta and the South Central where Pooja, me, Abhinandan and Manisha are in conversation with Kunal Kamra. You do see a 15-minute clip on YouTube, but that's not the full interview. The interview is 1.5 hours long, but that's available only to subscribers. So subscribe and listen to that interview. You can or watch the video on YouTube of both News Laundry and the News Minute. So we'll go to the headlines first, Pooja.
Tamil Nadu court convicts 9 in the Pollachi gang rape case. The Mahila court in Coimbatore delivered the verdict on May 13th. The case was that 9 men accused of running sexual exploitation and extortion racket, and they have been now convicted of gang rape and rape. The main accused was Sabri Rajan. Then you've tracked this very closely. What does it mean when the verdict is finally out?
So this started when a young woman was actually... she was meeting a friend, which is Shabri Nathan incidentally. His name is
Sabri Rajan.
Sabri Rajan, yeah. So she was meeting this man Shabri and he tried to assault her in the car. She escaped and she went and informed her family a few days later as they had started blackmailing her with the video. So there were 3 men other than the Shabri inside the car and they had taken videos of this molestation. It is the it is that decision which that young woman took which sort of unraveled this whole thing. So the brother of this young woman had accosted these guys, beaten them up and taken their mobile phones. When they switched on the mobile phones, to their shock, they discovered tens and hundreds of videos actually of young women and most of it were actually cases where they were blackmailing them with these videos. In fact, I remember for almost a month or 2 there was nothing else that Tamil Nadu could talk about and all these videos were out there. They were pretty disturbing. Now, one thing I want to say is that we have to really give credit to the CBI and to all the investigators who were part of this case initially because to convince 9 women to come to court and depose is not a small thing. So from these videos, they actually recognized 12 women and there is a gray area because some of the videos can appear to be consensual, but they were later used to blackmail these women. In certain videos, it is evident that it is a case of rape. But to convince all these women, no matter what the video showed, to actually come and depose in court, I think that really requires a lot of confidence building, between the police and the victim. Therefore, the the police officers and the CBI which took up this case, I think they have to be given credit for it.
But that's it. I think the role of one SP, the Pollachi SP, Dhanya Rajendran, came under scanner because he publicly revealed the survivor's identity.
No, this whole thing had become very political at that time because there was an AIDMK person who was one of the accused, and another AIDMK person was accused of threatening this young woman. So it had become very political. Remember, this happened just before elections in Tamil Nadu. So DMK had taken it up big time. It was not just the SP. There was a government order at that time giving relief to this young woman in which they published her name, the college she's studying, and her address. So I remember DMK MP Kanimudi and others saying at that time that the whole reason for publishing this woman's details is to ensure that none of the other women come and speak out. But thankfully, all that did not happen, and these men have been convicted now.
Shelling is a new reality. Evacuees from Jammu camp on attacks, bunkers and livelihood. This is a ground report by our colleagues Anmol and of course Nidhi Suresh. And this is from Jammu district's Pargwal region. And this had come under heavy shelling from Pakistan hours after Operation Sindoor on May 7th. We've been bringing ground reports, talking to people who've been impacted, not just injured, but also their house, their livelihoods have been impacted.
So a lot of these people have been asked to stay back in the camps. I mean, we all can get on with our lives, but for people who are there in especially in Jammu region, Rajouri, Poonch, etc., they have been moved to camps. And in these camps, these report had said that there's lack of water. Even in the hospitals, there's lack of water. So we have been doing ground reports, as we have been saying, no noise, no exaggeration. Nidhi and Anmol are going to bring you more reports about what is a real life repercussion for people living in Jammu Kashmir.
IAS IPS associations condemn online harassment of Foreign Secretary Vikram Misri. I cannot believe that they went after him. And all this for what? Because he was the person who declared ceasefire.
No, he came on a press meet and he said that we asked Pakistan not to violate the ceasefire. So they went behind his family, they went behind him, they figured out what his daughter is doing, where she studied, what she was working as, and of course the normal abuses. But till now, I don't think anybody in the government is officially condemned it, right?
That is the point that I was hoping that you would make, that Pooja just read out that the IAS association has condemned it. To what end? The NCW has also had some kind of statement saying this is reprehensible. What action are you taking against such statements or actions that you say are reprehensible? And what is startling to me is, where is the Minister for External Affairs in all this? This is his understudy. This is his number two. This is the man who is the face of the MEA. Not a word. Not a word of condemnation from anyone in the government. And extrapolating, but it also tells you that the government is not really interested in reining these people in, because they are the ones who carry the water for the government and, more importantly, for the ruling party.
But I think now this, the troll army has become a Frankenstein. I don't know if anybody really has control over this army anymore.
But they are not organic, Pooja. Many of the reports earlier have told us that, these kind of angers generated. There is a whole kind of organized way of WhatsApp groups working to generate this kind of a response online and harassment. They are not organic. They are very planned. So if they're going after a video, if they're going after an official, anybody that they can pick on, then it's all, I don't think that it's coming out of nowhere. It's definitely planned, and whatever diversion tactic or whatever they want to do there, that is what the end goal is, right?
Part of it, I would say, is planned, part of it not, because, you do have an organized thing with Excel sheets of names, numbers, handles to which these messages are sent for further transmission. We see this all the time on social media, right? The same message cut pasted by about hundreds of people. But what then happens is, on the ground, people get these messages, and then the whole Andy Warhol's 15 minutes of fame has now become 15 seconds of fame. I want to be famous in my residential locality or my office or whatever it is. So I amplify this and then add my own spin to it. And so it snowballs. And that, I think, is a real danger, because if it was concentrated in, let's say, an organized structure, at some point when this country wakes up and decides that it needs to clean this thing up, you can go after the structure. What do you do when it's amorphous? What do you do when it's your neighbor?
In other unrelated news, BBMP said to be restructured. Greater Bengaluru Act notified on May 15. By the time this comes on air, this would have been done.
So BBMP is
Split.
done, dead,
Yes.
no more. It's GBA now.
Yeah, I don't know what it did when it was there, but okay.
No, it's GB, Greater Bengaluru.
Greater Bengaluru, but yes.
Yeah.
But the thing is, we have to see if the practice of BBMP will continue in 4 different places, or will it actually bring any kind of relief. The Chief Minister, as we have explained in a previous episode of, we did take a deeper look at this in one of our episodes. The Chief Minister will chair GBA, so I'm hoping there'll be more coordination, more cohesion. SECI SECI chairman abruptly terminated. Congress alleges cover-up in the US Adani bribery case. This, of course, relates to Solar Energy Corporation of India, that is SECI, chairperson R.P. Gupta. Dhanya.
So there are 2 different things here. One is, I think he had just 1 month left before his tenure to end. There are 2 very important stories around SECI. One is, of course, the Adani Andhra Pradesh story, where Jagan Mohan Reddy is supposed to have been given money according to papers which were filed in the US. Now that case is going on one hand. On the other, there was a story which first the Guardian published, and it was the News Minute and Scroll that were co-publishers for that story, which showed how that land along the border was sanctioned to be used for solar energy parks, and from a government entity that land was just transferred to Adani. So there are 2 stories for which the SECI was being rogered, and what we are hearing is that there is unhappiness within the government that these documents were not kept secret and that they somehow leaked, which has become a big bane for the government, and that's the reason for the SECI chairman's termination, not anything else.
The last one, I really don't know what to make of this headline, but we'll go with it anyway. Only Hindus die after eating shawarma, says RSS Magazine's editor, R.N. Madhu. He also criticized the growing popularity of Arabian food, alleging that meat-heavy dishes are a negative cultural influence.
So he said it is shawarma, means sha is die, shavam. Shavam is a basic dead body in Malayalam. He said it's shawarma. Varma is a caste, right? So all Hindus are dying.
Yeah, Varma's dying.
No Muslims, no Christians are dying eating shawarma. The only thing is that when we put out the story on Instagram, etc., the comments are hilarious. People are just like roasting this RSS man quite a bit. And I'm happy that a lot of people are able to see through this, right? At least there is a section which sees through this.
What jihad
Did
is
they
this? Meat
say
jihad?
how long after consumption you die? Because I had shawarma earlier today. I'm not quite sure whether it'll last this entirety of the program. So
No, I think it will take a day because that bacteria, salmonella, whatever has to form.
I think you just want your program to go uninterrupted.
Yeah,
Terrible.
1 hour you'll definitely be alive. Okay, so now we will move on to the first topic. In fact, I'm going to discuss the India-Pakistan situation, but I want to chop this into 2 sections. The first, of course, we look at what's been happening, the Prime Minister's speech, Donald Trump's interventions, etc. And the second part, I want to look at the Indian media and coverage. I want to go beyond just English and Hindi media, because Indian media is not just English and Hindi. We are seeing carpet coverage of this entire thing across all languages. Joining us from Delhi is Sushant Singh. Sushant Singh is a journalist and he's a consulting editor at the Caravan magazine. He was a senior fellow at the Center for Policy Research in India. He's a visiting lecturer at Yale. He's also a former Indian military officer with 2 decades of uniform service. He's also worked for the He's also worked with the United Nations as an observer in Ivory Coast. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, Dhanya. Thank you for having me on the show.
So I'm going to come to you, Sushant, first. Now, the last 2 days, the biggest controversy is surrounding who really brokered the ceasefire, right? There's a lot of discussion whether it was America who wanted it. Did India approach America? Was it Pakistan? The Indian Prime Minister, of course, stayed away completely from mentioning America, though he did not say yes or no to it. He said that Pakistan was the one who approached us because they were completely beaten. Why do you think India is not acknowledging, or is Donald Trump exaggerating the whole thing?
So, Dhanya, very clearly the fact of the matter is that in some sense, the United States did play an important part in whatever transpired. Whether it doesn't mean that the United States came with an agenda sheet and said, you guys sign on this deal. The fact that the Vice President Vance, the Secretary of State Marco Rubio, they were talking to both the sides, whether it was to the Pakistani Army Chief or the Indian Prime Minister, Indian National Security Advisor, Indian Foreign Minister, Pakistani Prime Minister. That made sure that the two DGMOs eventually came out and spoke to each other. And so they acted as a kind of an interlocutor, a kind of a facilitator, even if it was not that they came with an agreement where they put the gun to the heads of Modi and Asim Munir and said, sign this deal here. So let's be clear about that. Without the US, this would not have happened. The deal, even the DGMO calls would not have happened, but for the United States. Now to come to the other question, why is Mr. Modi and why is the Indian government so wary of acknowledging that Trump did it? Because essentially it then shows them up that they didn't have control over the events and they can be bullied by someone like Trump, someone like the United States. And essentially, Mr. Modi likes to demonstrate and project strength and likes to show himself as this big star, who's on backslapping terms with everyone and who doesn't listen to any leader, does what he really feels like. But that is clearly not the truth. The fact is, then when the United States, tries and calls up, he does pick up the call and he does do what Trump asks him to do. And of course, India, Mr. Modi and his government need a lot from the Trump administration, whether it is in terms of trade and tariffs, the deal that they want from the United States, for which Piyush Goyal is going, and even otherwise. If the Chinese threat has to be countered, they need the US technological support, military support, diplomatic support. So there is very little that India can do or Mr. Modi can do, but he doesn't want to project that sign of weakness to his own supporters. As we have seen, people varying from Shrapan Das Gupta to Brahmachalani to former army chiefs have been terribly disappointed because somehow most of these people had been led to believe that India was going to have Asim Munir coming begging on his knees to New Delhi, and in Balochistan would be free and Pakistani Kashmir would be part of India, which was clearly far-fetched. It's not that it was a one-sided military engagement where the Indians were going to win everything. It was a more balanced, more not as one-sided as the Indian media and the Indian political leadership had tried to project it to be. So because Mr. Modi finds himself trapped in a certain manner, and because he has disappointed his core supporters, his hardcore supporters, he's trying to not talk about it, stay silent, or actually ignore that the United States and the Trump administration played an important role in what transpired between India and Pakistan.
I just want to, look at whether, I know it's not a popular opinion, but is ceasefire really a sign of weakness? Because India had stated a certain mission and it looked like, it did achieve that, because this wasn't a military exercise to, reach out and hit at Pakistan's military strength. It was a targeted, measured step that was achieved according to what the army has said, the armed forces has said. So what was the point in continuing this? Because escalation is not in anyone's interest, right?
No, it's not about just the target. What is the military target? So essentially, Pooja, the military target should be decided by the political leadership after knowing what is the desired end state that they want. And if the political leadership knows the desired end state, then you want to reach that desired end state as quickly as possible with as minimal damage or as minimal losses as possible. I don't think India's political leadership was evolved enough to know that or to give military that kind of a role. For the military to say that destruction of 9 buildings in 9 cities was our end goal, and in the bargain you lost whatever number of fighter jets you lost that night, clearly doesn't add up. The fact of the matter is that early next morning, Indians went after the air defense of Lahore and other places where these drones were sent. So clearly there was some kind of an emotional outburst to what India had suffered that night when India went after those 9 targets. Should India have de-escalated? There's a view that had India accepted that there were some major losses on that night with the fighter aircraft being lost, whatever the number of those fighter aircraft were, and which is part and parcel of any military engagement, that would have given an easy off-ramp to Pakistan to claim victory and walk away, and both sides could have then easily walked away. The fact that the Indians continued to not talk about those losses essentially led to the escalation which you are talking about.
No, so I think that India, what we have got unexpectedly is a Donald Trump, right? Who will just shoot his mouth off, and we never can expect what he says when. Even now, when the MEA says on record that there is no such talk. I mean, it was not a brokered ceasefire by the US, or the Prime Minister refuses to acknowledge it. There is always a danger of Donald Trump tomorrow saying something completely opposite.
He has been doubling down. Yeah.
And that is the unintended humor in this entire situation, right? Modi is basically a Potemkin facade propped up by a propaganda arm. And now comes a person who's actually weaponized that and industrialized it to such an extent that Modi doesn't know what to do. Trump just inserted himself into this. He's claiming credit for pretty much everything now. And the way he's claiming credit is increasing by the day. It starts with, we had some discussions. Now it is like, I called them, I told them this, I told them, okay, boys, come to the table, let's go have dinner together. And the Indian administration, the Indian government, the captive media, everybody seems helpless in how to counter this. What came out today was a nice little, a chart put out by the MEA. This is what Trump said, this is the truth. But Trump's bully pulpit is way, way bigger than that. And neither can Modi stand up and say Trump is a liar, because like Sushant pointed out, we need a lot from the US.
I think the chart was put out by a media organization based on the MEA's press meet.
That's right. The Hindu or somebody, right?
Yeah.
Also, as what Prem said, just to add to what Prem said here, the fact of the matter is that this is the only big win that Trump has scored so far. He has not been able to broker a peace deal between Ukraine and Russia. He has not been able to achieve anything in Israel and Gaza. His desire to develop it as a whatever tourist plaza or whatever has not worked out. He has lost the tariffs game with China. He has blinked there. This is the only win he has so far to show for, and that's why, as Prem said, he's going to harp on it even more loudly every time he's out in the public, whether it is in Saudi Arabia, whether it is in White House. He's going to harp on it, and that's going to be pretty embarrassing for Mr. Modi. So I think the consequence for Mr. Modi is not that Mr. Modi or the Indian government are going to accept this, arbitration or negotiation in a third country and start talking to Pakistan about Kashmir. The consequence will be that it will be politically embarrassing, because President Trump, he attracts a lot of social media attention, even though Indian newspapers and television channels may push it off to their back pages. But he will continue to attract attention, and he will continue to say this, because this is the only thing that he can showcase and say that I need to get the Nobel Peace Prize, which even people like Nixon and Obama got. So that is going to be pretty embarrassing for Mr. Modi politically, more than what goes on between India and Pakistan or what happens to Kashmir, internationalization of Kashmir in that sense.
And part of the problem with what has happened with the way Trump is claiming credit is, if you look at the international media and how they are covering the ceasefire and doing a final analysis of who won, who lost, it's all now seen from the US-centric or the Trump-centric point of view. The New York Times this morning, Reuters had a long story about, that portrays India as having been the big loser in this entire thing. So does the New York Times. So do various other international media outlets, and they're sourcing people from the US administration. Sushant made the point that Trump doesn't have any big win. He has one other. Trump too is the only president who actually defeated the record of Trump 1 in terms of low popularity. So like Sushant said, he badly needs this.
I also want to just go back to the point Pooja made, but in a little bit of in a different way. So Pooja say, so now if you look at it very dispassionately, a ceasefire is something that we would eventually want, right? Whether it's after 2 days, after 3 days or 30 days, nobody wants an escalation or a war, especially between two nuclear countries. Now, if you look at that, yes, what the government did in agreeing to the ceasefire, we don't know what the conditions are, is a good thing. But at the end of the day, this government is trapped in its own theatrics, where it has built this image where it seems it has to be the aggressor, and it has made its media and everybody and even the BJP, right? I think the day the ceasefire was announced, that day the BJP handle tweeted something about saying peace, that we will teach you a lesson, there'll be no talk, something like that. So it's also the theatrics which has sort of trapped Narendra Modi. Would you agree with that, Sushant?
Completely, Dhanya, you absolutely you hit the nail on the head. The fact of the matter is that Mr. Modi has boxed himself in by his own rhetoric, by his own theatrics, by his own speeches. And more than that, let me put it slightly differently to you. What is statecraft? Statecraft is essentially about generating as many options as you can generate, not about reducing them. So if you are a statesman, what you would do, you would create diplomatic options, you would create economic options, you would create people-to-people options, you would create, whatever informational options. You would do everything that you can do to increase the number of options and not limit itself to only the military domain or punitive military domain. Simultaneously, you would do both carrot and stick. You don't want to only say, I'm only going to punish you. You got to have reward and punishment both. You do this, I'm going to reward you, I'm going to open trade with you, do this. What we have instead is, because of these whole Hindu nationalism, Hindutva rhetoric, anti-Pakistan is, Mr. Modi has boxed himself into a very small window of punitive military strikes, where the next military strike has to be bigger than the previous one. So if 2016 special forces went across the line of control, 2019 it was the Air Force failed strike over Balakot, then it has to be 9 places. Next time it has to be probably 20 places or whatever, You are and then you can't really climb the escalation ladder because these are 2 nuclear weapon states. So you have boxed yourself into a very small window. What a good statesman would have done is use this opportunity to create a larger gamut of options across various domains so that you don't box yourself in. Because this is a very risky venture which we are playing out. Over to Prem.
Yeah, actually, I'm glad that you're on this program, Sushant, because I started writing a blog post about it, and then I suddenly saw a post that you had put up in 240 characters. You killed my blog post. The post was, you said, and you were referencing Modi's speech. You said, if India is saying that the doctrine now is any terrorist strike in India, any terrorist attack in India, of whatever extent, 2 people with guns, whatever, is going to invite retaliation against the Pakistan state, you're creating a situation where 2 people with guns can actually bring 2 countries to war. And to me, that was the most bizarre moment of that speech.
But is that fair to say? Because it is not just two. I'm being the devil's advocate here. Sure. To a lot of people, it does seem like this is a new doctrine for India, right? Where Narendra Modi is making very clear that there cannot be terror with talks, there cannot be terror with trade, and there cannot be blood and water flowing together. Now, we are not dealing with any other country. We are dealing with a country like Pakistan, which time and again, we have dossier after dossier saying that they do support terrorist activity, that it is state-sponsored. Even, in fact, after the India's Operation Sindoor, we saw those pictures emerging where Jaish-e-Mohammed, the terrorists, are along with the army, right? So then, India is also being pushed into a corner where they have to react in a certain way, in which that whole thing of please.
Dhanya, let me also add this, and in this whole thing we are maybe not looking enough at the bigger player there, that is China here in this geopolitics. Are we looking at how it has empowered Pakistan to go full on into this fight, into a weak state like Pakistan to come head on with India, to engage in this war, so that US had to dial down. Is US looking at what China is doing? There is India really in its narrative looking at how China has empowered Pakistan. Sushant, do you want to respond to how that has played out?
Fair enough. First, I'll respond to Dhanya. Dhanya, terrorism is bad, horrible, should be condemned, should be prevented through intelligence, security, whatever it is. But terrorism is not an existential threat to India. Terror attacks, killing 20 people, 30 people, and I'm again emphasizing they are horrible, they should be condemned, they should be prevented, but they are not going to break apart India. India has much bigger challenges. Let's not overhype terror incidents into some kind of an existential challenge for India. Terrorism needs to be stopped by doing things that we need to do on our own. Why was there no intelligence about what happened in Pahalgam? Why were there no security personnel in Pahalgam to prevent what was going on? There are enough questions on our side which remain unanswered, rather than directing the attention towards Pakistan. Okay, now I'll compare it to 2008. 2008 Mumbai terror attack is held as an example when Dr. Manmohan Singh, M.K. Narayan as National Security Advisor, Shiv Shankar Menon as Foreign Secretary did not do this. Clearly, Shiv Shankar Menon in his book Choices has spoken about it, mentioned, he said at that time as a Foreign Secretary, he believed that, it should have been a more militant option. But as time passed, he realized that what Dr. Manmohan Singh decided was the right thing to do. Firstly, Dr. Manmohan Singh used the same argument that Prem used, that, you can't have 4 terrorists deciding that when will I go to war. It's absolutely ridiculous. This is a country of 1.4 billion people with nuclear weapons. You're not going to decide I'm going to war when because just some guy gets 20 kgs of RDX, goes and, bangs into a convoy of CRPF vehicles, and I'm going to start using my nuclear weapons there. Or for that matter, 4 guys with guns, AK-47, which are randomly available because the NATO forces left Afghanistan, or M16 or whatever those guns are, can come and kill someone. That they cannot have control over my policy. I will decide when I want to go to war, not these random people. Secondly, because India did not go to war with Pakistan in 2008 over Bombay, India was able to get all the international appreciation and support that was not going to come earlier. Thirdly, Pakistan was really hurt by FATF. I was just talking to Khurram Hussain on another show for The Wire. Khurram Hussain is a top-notch Pakistani journalist. He said for the next 7 to 8 years, we were hit so badly by FATF because of what India did in 2008. Prem, I'll come to it, but let me finish just this point which I'm making about Anish Goyal used to be the director for South Asia in Obama White House and in the Bush White House. Anish himself said that Obama said, do anything, but India and Pakistan should not go to war. Whatever India wants, give it to them. So what you see that India's arc of rise is starting in 2006-7 going up, actually get benefits from the fact that India chose not to militarily attack Pakistan at that time. Anish slept for 3 weeks in White House, did not go to his home at that time. He said whatever India wanted because of time zone difference, he said we did whatever was required at that point in time to make sure. India benefited tremendously from this. This time we were not even able to produce any shred of evidence. And that's why you see the kind of very weak, tepid diplomatic support that India got. Other than Israel, who has supported India? People are not even talking about terrorism. Essentially, we have reached a stage where people are talking about nuclear threat. People are talking about Kashmir. This is a complete negation of what we want. This is a diplomatic failure, essentially, if you couch it up in a thing. India and Pakistan have been hyphenated. Pakistan's threat of nuclear weapon has been accepted. Internationalization of Kashmir issue has happened. Trump says that I'm going to negotiate and resolve Kashmir between you guys, you fighting kids. This is negation of everything India has achieved in the last 20 years. This is what has been achieved by this. So let's keep it in perspective. This rhetoric and emotion is fine, but this is not what the reality is. And states cannot be run on basis of emotion, rhetoric, and speeches. The states must be run on hard, rational calculations and realism. So that is the fundamental point where I differ from a lot of coverage that we have in India's big media. Prem, do you want to come here, or should I respond to the China point also?
No, I just wanted to pick up from something that both you and Dhanya said in various ways. Dhanya
is not saying, Dhanya is asking because somebody has to ask, right?
Okay. So what Dhanya asked, do we agree that terrorism is bad, therefore something needs to be done? All of that, yes. My point is this. We agreed that terrorism was bad. We've never disagreed on that. Nobody has. Everybody in India is like terrorism bad. My question is, what are we doing in the interim? We have Balakot, which is supposed to have ended the threat of terrorism. Now we have Pahalgam and after Operation Sindoor. In between, in all these intervening years, what was the government doing in order to halt terrorism? Are we just going to be a reactive country? Because that is the danger. I'm not saying India shouldn't react or that India shouldn't take action when there is terrorism on Indian soil. What I'm saying is, are we going to just wait for these episodes to happen, then do something that plays to the gallery, then it's business as usual until the next attack? Is that how it's going to be? Because then it is a risk. Like Sushant said, it's not going to break us, but it's going to be a constant negative hanging over us. And increasingly, the international community is going to get sick and tired of this.
Yeah. Sushant, just to expand on what Leena was saying. Yes.
Okay. I just want to make one point on what Prem said. So essentially, what Prem is saying, what many of us would call deterrence, that when you did attacks what you did in 2016 with so-called surgical strikes, or 2019 with Balakot strike, did you prevent the next terror strike? Were you able to alter Pakistani state's behavior or the behavior of these militants or terrorists, whatever you wish to call them? No. Clearly, you have not been able to do that, because every time another major incident has happened. So clearly, this idea that you can punish and deter Pakistan or Pakistani trained or Pakistani supported terrorists has failed. It has not worked. And why are we expecting that this time this is going to suddenly succeed when we are doing this? These are just punitive strikes meant to satisfy the heightened emotions which have been heightened by India's big media of the people, and also to bolster the image of the prime minister and to make him look like a very strong, very powerful leader who has got a 56-inch chest. Beyond that, there's very little that I can think of.
But, I was watching this interview of Arun Shuri with Karan Thapar, and one point really stayed with me. He said that every time there's terrorism, the response is not military bombardment. Intelligence is the only real solution to terrorism. So on that front, I want both of you to come in and rate what Modi government has done, what it's gotten right if it has, and if it's not, why has it managed to slip it all away?
really, intelligence, of course, has to be there. Covert operations also have to be there. So, there have to be many arrows on your quiver. There cannot be only one arrow, depending on what the situation is, what the global geopolitical situation is, what is the nature of terror incident, what your domestic political compulsions are. You can decide and then choose whatever option you wish to choose. My problem essentially is that you have taken away all the arrows out of your quiver. You have only one arrow. And as the old proverb goes, if you have only a hammer, every problem looks like a nail, and then you end up doing what we are witnessing. So while this is all fine, nobody's against punitive strikes, nobody's against what is being done, but I think to showcase them as a solution, to showcase them as a very strategic thought, I think that's unfair, and I don't think enough critical examination of this kind of approach, this kind of attitude, and these kind of policies is being done. As for the intelligence, how good is the intelligence? How bad is the intelligence? To give you the example, what the kind of charges of transnational operations in Canada and in the United States, the way the Indian intelligence agents operated, the way Nikhil Gupta was arrested, the way they were giving money in New York, doesn't really give me great confidence that these guys are top of the league in the kind of operations that they do. It was not about the operation, what they chose to do, or the targets that they were taking out, but the fact that they were so bumbling, amateurish in the conduct of those operations, that should really worry us.
So I just want to expand what Leena was saying. So before, we read about when the Soviet Union was there, about the wars being separated as US versus Soviet. But has this war also in one sense given a new order for us, considering that India is saying that Turkey and China have given the arms to Pakistan? And we have seen yesterday, I think in the press conference, Air Marshal A.K. Bharti said that PL-15, which is a long-range missile produced by the China's Aviation Industry Corporation, was actually there were remnants of it, and it was noticed. So there's J-10C jets by China. There's this PL-15 long range missile. So are we seeing a division of the world order in one way, that there are these countries which are giving arms to Pakistan, and those ones which are giving it to India? Of course, America would be giving it to everybody, I guess. Sushant?
Yeah, Dhanya, see, the China-Pakistan military cooperation, military collusion is a well-known fact. The fact is that the Indian government of India and the Indian military in the early 2000s changed its policy and said we have to be now prepared for a two-front collusive threat, essentially collusion between China and Pakistan. The missiles that you named, the aircraft that you named, they've all been publicly, officially handed over with videos, with photographs, with press releases by China. So it is not anything which is hidden or anything which is not known to the world or to Indians. 81% of Pakistani military equipment in last 5 years has come from China. Probably primarily because, one, the equipment is cheaper, and the Pakistani pockets are not that deep that they can afford to buy Western equipment. Also, Western interest in Pakistan has come down since the NATO forces have gone out of Afghanistan. Western countries are no longer interested in Pakistan. Pakistan has also been an economic mess. It's almost a pariah state geopolitically. It is also politically unstable. It's a kind of country which nobody wants to touch with a barge pole. So Pakistan China is the only country, and that there's a long history to it. Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, when he was the foreign minister of Pakistan in the late 1950s, decided that he wanted to go with China as a partner, as an ally. At that time, China, nobody cared for China. China was a country which not many people had a relationship with. I believe Pakistan was the first first pro-Western country which opened its ties with China at that time, and then helped Nixon and Kissinger go to China in 1971, open ties. So they have a long history of very close ties, ironclad brothers, where they've always collaborated and cooperated. What is significant this time on the China factor is not that China gave them weapons or China gave them missiles or etc. What is more significant is that the Chinese weapon system, the Chinese tactics that the Pakistani Air Force used, because Pakistani Air Force was doing a lot of exercises with the PLA Air Force. That is something for the first time they were deployed against Western platforms like Rafale. Never before have Chinese platforms, Chinese tactics, Chinese weaponry, Chinese missiles have been deployed against Western platforms. This is the first time that a top-notch Western platform, 4.5 generation Rafale aircraft, was against Chinese systems. And by all accounts, as you said, whether it's the New York Times, whether it's the Financial Times, Le Monde, Libération, name any paper, the Pakistani systems did better than the Rafale. And that is a big shocker. The company that makes J-10 and the PL-15 missiles, its shares on first day went up by 40%, whereas the Dassault makes Rafale aircraft, their shares actually went down. And because this will have a great consequence for Taiwan, where again Chinese weaponry will be deployed against Western platforms and Western weaponry, and in other places in the world where people would now be saying, should we not buy Chinese equipment because it is much cheaper? So it has great commercial consequences for big defense companies, for multinational defense companies. That is the greater significance. Also, people will be studying how the Chinese platforms worked, how the Chinese equipment worked, how Chinese weapon system worked against India, and the fact that the Pakistani Air Force used Chinese tactics and the network-centric warfare model, which they picked up from the PLA Air Force with very close association and training, and employed it against India, is something which will be studied deeply in the coming years. To my mind, the only equivalence of this is the first Gulf War, when the US forces, NATO forces under Bush, went against Saddam Hussein. That was a pivotal moment in how warfare changed at that point in time. A new generation of warfare was coming in. It will be similarly studied as to how these platforms worked and how this equipment worked. That is where I think the significance of China in this conflict lies.
So, because he mentioned the word Rafale, I'll go to the last thing that I want to ask everybody in the here in the discussion. This whole fracas about whether Pakistan actually shot down 1 or 2 or 3 of our Rafale jets, right? There has been a lot of discussion about this. In the press conference, there was a reporter from the Hindu newspaper who asked the question, can you give a number of the assets? And there is a lot of talk about our Rafale jets being down. Can you give an answer to these questions? Now, Air Marshal A.K. Bharati said that I'm very happy to answer this question, that you asked this question. And he said that we are in a combat scenario and losses are a part of the combat. So basically, he did not answer the question directly, but he said this is not the time to ask. The time now is only to ask whether we met the objective. And our objective was to hit the terror outlets, and which we did. Now, there are lots of questions I want to ask. The first, of course, is a journalistic one on whether immediately the interest should be whether, as an Indian outlet, for example, should interest be on, was a Rafale shot down? What do you think?
So journalistically, yes, I understand, Vivek. All of us had these conversations in our newsroom, and it would mean a lot because, like we discussed already, there are repercussions, there are ripple effects globally and within India. But I do understand why there was reluctance at that time. Can that hold forever? At what point can we now start asking those questions again? That is a conversation we need to restart. Maybe 3 days ago, when Operation Sindoor was still operational, it might have been hit to the morale of the forces, or it could have spread panic and all of that. But now, can we ask those questions, and is the government bound to answer them? I think yes.
Well, if the government doesn't want to answer directly, which is what we saw there, and he's saying that, we didn't lose any army person, our people are
All
back.
our pilots are back
Or
safely.
our pilots are back, but he didn't categorically say a no to if the assets were lost. But then what is available to international media to find an answer to this is also available to Indian media, right? All the mainstream media all have the resources to go and dig up the answers for this. So why won't they?
But should that be our concern at that time is the question.
Of course. Why wouldn't it be, Prem?
No, I was just thinking.
Yeah, lots of questions there. But Pooja, to first say that the morale of the forces will go down if they come to know that the 3 or 5 or whatever, fighter jets were brought down. No. Just remember Kargil. We were losing officers and soldiers by the day. This is a professional military. I served in this army for 20 years. This is a professional organization where we know that losses are a part of the deal. You go there, you accept them. Nobody wants to die. Nobody wants their comrades or their buddies or their friends to die. I'm not saying that. But it doesn't affect the morale in the sense that I'm going to sit on my haunches and say, oh, I'm not going to fight because 10 of my buddies are dead. No, you will go even with greater vigor, greater force and do this. That's what professional militaries do. So I think it is not the morale of the armed forces, it is the morale of the political leadership and their PR campaign that would be actually punctured more than anything else by letting the news out. Should the news come out? Okay, let me put it slightly differently. Pakistan made 2 sets of claims. One was on the first night that they brought down 5 aircraft, including 3 Rafale, 1 UAV, 1 MiG-29, 1 Sukhoi 30 MKI. And on the Saturday evening, they gave a long list that we destroyed the IT center so that the power has gone away. We destroyed a BrahMos dump. We destroyed 2 S-400s. We destroyed 15 air bases. There was a long laundry list. The Indian military leadership, the 3 DGs who sat there, DG operations, they denied each of the items on the second list. They did not mention any. They have never spoken about the first night thing. Why? If you're willing to talk about those claims during operations, then you should be as much willing to talk about the claims on the first night. So clearly there is something to hide. Then there are other examples. In 2019, when the Balakot thing took place, there was a blue on blue, that is a friendly fratricide killing of own helicopter with 7 chaps. That was never brought out till Ajay Shukla was the only one who reported it. People waited to report on it till the time the elections were over. The Air Force and nobody reported on it. It had nothing to do with morale. The operation was over in a day. Clearly, the people were hiding stuff. And that is why, most of us would have understood if we did not have this context and the background where earlier such things have happened, where stuff has not been allowed to come out in the manner it should have come out earlier. And I think because of that reason, there is a question. At what point can we ask the question? Definitely once the ceasefire has been announced and once the operations have ceased, definitely there would have been a stock taking, and that is good enough time for people to know. Personally, if you ask me as a journalist, I would want to know it the day it happens. And I think as much information as you give at that point in time would be helpful for us. My personal view is, as Ali Ahmed, former Lieutenant Colonel, has spoken and written about it, that if India had accepted on first day that it had lost whatever fighter jets it had lost, probably Pakistan would have walked away and we would have had the ceasefire on day one itself. So I am personally, if you ask me, my view is that honesty is the best policy. You should not hide stuff, and definitely not after these operations have gotten over or there is a suspension of operations or a ceasefire.
And just to add to that, if say Air Marshal Bharti had said we did not lose a Rafale, that's a whole other thing, right? What he did was obfuscate, and I'm not saying that in a critical sense. I'm saying that's how he answered. He said, there is an operation ongoing. This is not the time that we want to talk about our losses. That was his message. What that has led to is unnecessary speculation. Now it is like, we've lost Rafales. How many Rafales have we lost? It's claim and counterclaim. Did we lose 1? Did we lose 5? This could have been avoided. It merely vitiates the atmosphere at a time when we should be moving on from this. And I think that's the unfortunate
But I want to ask one more thing, Sushant. Why is there such an obsession? Like, I understand that there is a lot of money riding on Rafales. For example, in 2016, we had first bought Rafale 36 jets for 60,000 crore deal. And then again, April 2025, we had the second deal where we said 64,000 crores. Caravan had a very long investigation done by Sagar on how this whole deal with Dassault was even signed in a very problematic way, where India did not take the advice of its own law ministry, saying that some of these clauses are not correct. We have given France too much. Like, we can't even ask for liability in France in certain things. I mean, I would ask people to go back and read some of the stories because those are very important. I think it was published in the Caravan in 2018. But my question to you is, in the international media, there seems to be a lot of coverage on Rafale, right? Like, almost every outlet has 2 or 3 stories. Why? Is that because India's denial sort of spurred them to do more reporting? Or is it because of the cost of the Rafale jet and this whole China Western frontiers?
So I think the primary reason, Dhanya, is because it's the first time that a 4.5 generation aircraft has been brought down, or allegedly brought down, to be on the safer side. Never before has a 4.5 generation aircraft, such a modern aircraft, which is seen to be a top-notch aircraft, has been brought down in an aerial conflict. Therefore, there is a huge amount of interest. And of course, as you rightly said, the second reason why there is so much of interest is because it has massive business consequences. These are, as you said, $250 million per aircraft that India had paid for these 36 Rafale. It has huge consequences for the kind of business. If Rafale is not that good an aircraft, then the Qataris Air Force and the Saudis or whoever else was buying these fighter jets, or whoever else was going to buy from here onwards, would probably start looking elsewhere. They would probably start looking at F-35 from the Americans or wherever else. So there is a lot of money riding on this, a lot of business interest riding on this kind of a story. Therefore, there is deep interest. More than the fact that India has denied it, I don't think anybody cares whether India denies it or accepts it. It has consequences which go far beyond India and Pakistan.
So, I mean, the words that we used to, at least the armed forces used to describe the exercise was measured, right? That's one thing we cannot use to describe what the Indian media did the last 15 days or so. I mean, if you thought that you've seen the depths of it, they found a way to surprise you further, right? And like Dhanya said earlier, it isn't just the Hindi and English media, though they kind of took the crown. Regional
They
media
always
too.
take the crown.
They always do.
And it's
because-
all TV. I think it's less newspapers. Newspapers,
Of
I
course.
think, were more mature in their coverage. At
Media,
least-
like I said, yeah.
But in the initial reports, when I had heard from the government, was that the army would respond in its appropriate manner, in its time, and in the way that it will decide to. But then the Indian studios decided that the response is going to be
The graphics are, of course, one thing where everybody's sitting on a fighter jet and just going. That's like the biggest abomination. But
and they wanted
I think
the
that's the
neighboring
least
state
of the
wiped
crimes.
off the planet.
That's
no,
right.
I'm saying visually that's one abomination.
Yeah.
But I think we should really put some focus on a couple of things which the Indian media did. One is not disinformation, I think misinformation and fake news,
Yeah.
which is spread across languages. Like in Telugu, for example, our colleague Anjana has put together some notes of what
Yeah.
happened.
V6, which is a news channel, it carried a report claiming that Ajit Doval tweeted about Operation Sindoor's success with patriotic music in the background. Now, Doval is not on Twitter. And the V6 handle used tweets of a handle called Ajit Doval Parody. It was in the name, but clearly they didn't bother reading it. Another one, Enadu, which is a well-known reputed newspaper, in its front page carried a photo claiming that Indian forces had captured a Pakistani pilot. Even Z Rajasthan News did this. Alt News, of course, confirmed that this was not true and nobody has, in fact, come up with it. And the visual that they used, the photo that they used, was from Turkish military personnel who was safely evacuated. The third one, NTV Telugu shared a video of a couple dancing and said it was the last video of Lieutenant Vinay Narwal and his wife Himanshi.
No, that I think a lot of people did. So I think nobody is even apologizing for misinformation. I think disinformation is, of course, the death of that of the madrasa teacher in Jammu, Khari Muhammad Iqbal. The moment he died in shelling in Poonch city, he was actually a teacher at the Zia ul Aloom Madrasa in Poonch. So when he died, a lot of news channels went on air calling him the brain behind Lashkar-e-Toiba. One person sat on News 18 and said that he's not a terrorist, but he is someone who actually was the ideological fountainhead of this entire thing. And look, somebody is just dead and you have declared him a terrorist, you have declared him the ideological fountainhead. The Jammu Kashmir police had to intervene and say that this is a respected man in their community. How many news channels have apologized for their misconduct?
When was the last time a news channel apologized for
Exactly.
anything?
But I mean, take that one step back and look at what this means for media operations, right? Sorry, if it was one channel that published a fake news or a wrong news or whatever, okay, that is a breakdown of due process in a particular newsroom. Here, you're talking multiple channels, you're talking digital media houses, you're talking the entire spectrum, except print mercifully, right? All journalists sitting in this room, but even for a non-journalist, a very simple way of looking at this. How does a story become a story? How does a story, what are the steps for something that happens in the external world to become a media story? We hear something, it might be a fact that comes to our attention, it might be an incident that we're told about, whatever. What do you do as an editor? You're then asking yourself some fundamental questions. Is this relevant? Is there a greater relevance to this? Is this a story worth doing? And then you're deploying people to find out what the story is actually. So in this case, you hear that a Maulana has been killed. The story that was published was one, that he was a mastermind or an ideologist. I mean, various people made up various things, but everybody pretty much agreed on the fact that he was somehow connected to Lashkar-e-Toiba. And two, that he was killed by an Indian military operation across the line of control. India's military never crossed the line of control. That is one. All of this said, what I want to know is what is the connective tissue that allowed all these media houses to go from the death of a person to Lashkar-e-Toiba to an Indian military? What would be the first step in a newsroom? You would have picked up the phone and called the Jammu and Kashmir police and said, we've heard that so-and-so is killed and that there's some connection to terrorism or whatever. Is there any truth to it? And they would have said, no, there isn't. End of story. So how did this happen?
No, there's a sinister side to this, and I want everybody to read the News Minute and News Laundry site tomorrow, which is Friday, when we'll have a ground report from Poonch. Nidhi Suresh and Anmol Preetham are there. We have spoken to local journalists who work for all these channels, and what they've told us is that they only said that the madrasa teacher has died in a shelling by Pakistan. And apparently the news did not even come out for a few hours. In certain channels instances, it did not even come that day. By the time the next day, that man had been branded a terrorist. And the local journalists are really shocked. So do read that story. We have 2 reporters who have been bringing these stories because we believe that whatever it is about people on the ground, right?
Could I just offer perspective to answer your question? How did this happen? As a person having the misfortune of working in these newsrooms too long. So I think when all of you guys...
You mean TV newsrooms?
TV newsrooms,
Yes,
I
yes.
meant. Definitely not TNM newsroom.
Yeah.
So the reporter on the ground is the last person to be kept informed on what is going to go on air, right? And their inputs are not even heard, forget considered. This is how an average newsroom today works. You pick up something from... There are 300 those panels there. You pick up something from here and there. You do not verify. You see what extra layer of drama you can add to that. It could be something that you've taken off of WhatsApp, Twitter, Instagram, anywhere, right? Then the reporter is called if you need a reporter's face, and they're given lines saying, can you just come on air and repeat? Not even 10 seconds to verify what has been
Yeah, I want
given.
to add to this. So
Yeah.
basically, if you walk into a newsroom of a channel, you have lots of screens, right? And some random channel be running a news. The news desk guy say, "Chalo, ye chal raha hai. This channel, take it." So they will take it. Then they will add I have seen so many cases where they will just say, now add this line more, which is a layer of exaggeration,
Yeah.
right? So imagine if 10 channels are copying the same news from madrasa teacher
Grape wine
died
effect, yeah.
wearing skull cap, my God, then becomes a terrorist. Terrorist meaning has to be Lashkar-e-Toiba. So that is how it progressively becomes worse. I think the only solution is to sue these news channels really badly, because I think even them offering an apology is not enough.
Because look at the revenue they've earned
Who's
from
going to bail that
this.
cat? Who's going to sue?
I
And
hope
when
this
is
family
this
does.
case going to actually ever be heard?
Yeah.
Given our judicial system, Sushant, I think, has...
Yeah. So, Dhanya, can I take offense to one of your points about newspapers being much better or much more balanced than television channels? I really don't think so. Maybe you are reading only the Hindu, or I don't know, maybe Deccan Herald, probably sitting in Bangalore. You are not getting the kind of newspapers North India gets. No names taken. Some of the newspapers seen as very reputed, I think, are essentially doing stenography, and I have a huge problem with that. That is not journalism at all. There is no context. There is no questioning. There's nothing. Actually, essentially, it is just sources told me this and sources told me that, and that makes everything in the newspaper. That's not what the business or job of a newspaper is. They may not be as bad as television channels, I understand that, but they're pretty bad by newspaper standards. Newspapers are supposed to be much, much better than that. I have huge problems with English language newspapers in India. I do read many of them. I follow them very closely virtually on a daily basis. I followed them for years. I think their decline is also an indicator of the decline of Indian democracy and what has happened to Indian democracy. Essentially, if you talk to friends, people will say, and I'm sure Dhanya, you have heard it, Prem has heard it, all of us have heard people say, "Oh, I've got EMIs to pay." "Oh, sir, you've talked to a senior editor, he'll say, "Oh, sir, I have 250 jobs, Sushant. You don't understand. There are 250 jobs under my..." But then why are you doing journalism, man? Go and do some business. Yeah? Journalism has some value. It's as much public service, as much social service as it is business. It cannot be purely a business thing, that I have an EMI to pay or 250 jobs to protect. And I think the Indian television is beyond pits. Like, nobody cares for it. I don't want to take names, but if you are going to say Karachi port has been captured or whatever, nobody's going to care for you. But I think more dangerous are Indian newspapers, which do not provide context, which do not question, which parrot out everything in a very almost sounding rather serious manner and mislead the larger public into believing that this is serious stuff. We need to actually also focus our attention on Indian newspapers and editors.
I agree, I take your point, but there is something more dangerous about the visual medium, right? Because, the fact that it's coming into your, and in a situation like this, people want to know everything right then. So when someone's saying that, though you might not believe it, because all of them have become parodies of journalists, right? And I want to quickly also talk about the kind of panelists we see, right? I don't know what words to use, but I want to take a few names today. Major Gaurav Arya, Abhijit Iyer Mitra, Sushant Singh, your namesake, sorry. And there were a couple of others. And I don't know what all of their expertise, they're all passed off as defense experts. I'm sure they have some level of expertise, but that's not what they were talking about on air. What they were the kind of language, the amount of misinformation and disinformation they were spreading, people are absorbing it even if they don't want to, right?
And the language of violence, which is another thing I want to just touch upon. It's not just misinformation, disinformation. It is like TV channels, news channels, something which even children watch. Adults also are prone to get more violent, I feel. Like there was a Kannada channel, the editor said that, I think he was talking about one of the ministers in Pakistan. Of course, none of us are feeling kind to anybody there at that point of time. But he says, I want that dog to be shot dead. I want to see that bullet piercing through his head. There's so much of violence in language, right? Like this Gaurav Arya, Major Gaurav Arya, or retired, whatever. He said that, what is it? Maut ka naach nachana hai. And Lahore or Karachi or one of them should be just set on fire.
Firstly, Sushant can actually speak better to this, but he is not a major. He's using a title he's not even entitled to. But that aside, again, step back a little bit. The problem is that this particular genie has been let out of the bottle and nobody now can actually put it back inside. I was thinking, we were talking about this earlier, right? There used to be this program called Match Ka Mujrim. After every cricket match, ODIs, one day, you would have a bunch of panelists, including former greats of the game, sitting in a television studio trying to find the villain of the match. It's a match. And again, you talked about language. You should have heard the language that was used there. He's useless. He should be... Okay, I'm paraphrasing. Some of it was much worse. Today, news has become Match Ka Mujrim. Every day we need a mujrim because we have created a concept. Who's our audience? Who's the audience we are playing to? People who have been drip-fed hate 24/7. To keep that audience captive, we need to keep providing hate objects. We need to keep giving them reasons to hate. We need to point them at people and say, okay, this is your target for today. And that explains today's coverage. Nothing else explains.
For those who do not know Hindi, what does the show translate to?
Match Ka Mujrim, villain of the match.
Villain of the match. Leena, you want to add something?
Culprit of the match.
Culprit of the match, yeah.
No, I want to specifically come to this point of where, editors of big newsrooms or big television studios are taking news out of WhatsApp and Twitter threads by some loony out there and turning it into news. What's the difference between that person who holds that position and a Residents' Welfare Association uncle who would just take a WhatsApp forward, add another two lines of outrage and forward it? But also when we put the responsibility on the journalists and these editors. It's also the people who consume news that we should find faulted. Where has the Modi government landed with this after Balakot and after each other, further escalation of a war-like situation? It wins narratives because people are so fickle-minded. This narrative works to get them ballot boxes filled, right? If it would not have, then it would not have gone to this position where it is currently in. So if there is this demand in the market for this kind of news and this kind of naach and this kind of studio atmosphere, and if somebody is willing to pay for it, which is the public, which is what they want for entertainment, then of course somebody is going to provide it. And if it's winning them ballot, then they are going to sponsor it. But at the end of the day, the public should really think of what they are consuming 24/7 on the news channels, right? And whenever we go to speak about the state of journalism, I place a lot of blame on the kind of news consumption that the public out there is having.
Okay, can I want to ask, which is the most viewed television channel in this country today?
We'll never know. Because it's all rigged.
Okay, forget it. Whatever evidence we have or whatever data we have, we'll use that for the sake of argument. Which is it?
Republic, Times Now.
Okay, either Times Now or Republic. What would the audience be?
Very few millions.
in a country of 1.5
Yes.
crore, out of which, let's say, 1.5 crore, we can't, 140 crore, whatever, we can't keep using that number. Let's at least admit that the most viewed television channel in this country does not get 1% of the population of this country to watch. So when we keep saying that we are feeding an audience expectation, we are feeding the expectation of a very small, a minuscule section of the audience.
No, but
No,
I
hang on.
disagree. I disagree.
No, hang on. Let me finish. One is that. Secondly, it is no longer a cash and carry thing. I give you what you want and therefore you are paying me or whatever. Television news in particular has moved away from the model of the audience is not where the money is coming from, right? The money is coming from two places. One is the crony capitalists who are funding it, and they are not interested in your revenue or your bottom line. They are interested in, because I have a channel, because this channel carries water for the government will in turn do things for me. That is one. The second is a pure transaction. I'll hold a conclave or whatever, some fancy sounding name. I'll get the prime minister, I'll get the home minister, the finance minister, and the foreign minister. I'm done. Corporates, whether they like it or not, have to advertise, have to sponsor. We make a lot of money. These are the revenue streams. So the audiences become irrelevant. So now you have channels sitting there. You have somebody sitting up there in government circles, or at least embedded inside, say it out, no? Embedded inside the PMO, who every morning sends out a WhatsApp message which is broadcast to all these editors saying this is the talking points for the day. It's an open secret in this industry that newsrooms do not. How does a newsroom actually decide on what they're going to run, particularly in prime time? You have the run order that is a tentative run order in the morning, and then you have regular meetings, and you keep refining this until you have the final run order. Pooja should know this. Today-
Those are all stopped like
exactly.
years ago.
So
There's no
today how
proper rundown.
Today,
Yeah.
how are we doing it? The editor comes in and says, "Aaj mere ko ye mila hai. These are the instructions I've got." So how do we dress it up is the only question that the newsroom has to answer.
Where I disagree with you is, yes, very few people in comparison watch these English news channels. But there are two things that they do. They're aspirational, they're narrative setting. So what happens is the message, because there are, let's say, a Kannada editor doesn't have access to PMO, but he wants to be on the right side of the PMO. He watches a Republic or a Times Now, apes the same thing, adds a little bit of local flavor, local masala. So the venom gets passed on, right? And far more people watch your Kannada, your Telugu, Tamil, Malayalam, Hindi, of course, right? So the poison is spread through these news channels. That is a real problem.
Yeah, this part in fact, we are not in disagreement.
Yeah.
I was looking at it from the
No,
point of view
yeah.
of pure, is this a revenue play? It is not.
Yeah.
It's
Sushant,
not.
Yeah, so quick 2 points. One of my favorite things is about television channels and war is Kargil. As I've said elsewhere, I think to Shoaib Daniel at the Scroll also, I told him that the Indian news television channels did so well in Kargil war. But one of the lessons that Musharraf learned was that they lost the narrative war to Indian television channels. So when he became the military dictator of Pakistan a year or so later, the first thing he did was to actually start private news channels in Pakistan. That's a fact. He did not start private news channels in Pakistan because he was a liberal Democrat and believed in freedom of speech and wanted channels to criticize. The direct linkage was to what Indian news television channel had done in Kargil. Compared to that, what Indian television news channels are doing now in the recent episode, whatever has gone on this last week, is clearly like they are actually hurting India. They're harming India. They're not helping India's strategic cause. So this is a journey that we have seen in last 26 years, in a sense. Second thing about newspaper I wanted to say today was a very specific case of one retired army vice chief writing the same piece being published by 4 different newspapers. This is not a syndicated column. He has written for the first time. It is in 4 newspapers today. Because I think clearly it has been told that this should be run, because the piece argues in a slightly articulate, intellectual, strategic sounding fashion to say, why did the government stop the operations when it stopped those operations? 4 newspapers have run the same piece, not a syndicated column, run it prominently. I'm like, we've all worked in newspapers. Which newspaper would run a column being run by another newspaper? Nowhere else. Clearly, it's a plant. That is the level at which we are now operating. That government plants stuff, self-respecting editors of newspapers who otherwise will go and crow about freedom of speech and give big lectures are willing to be pliable editors and willing to run that stuff. So I think, and my worry is that is even more dangerous than television, because television has almost killed itself, gone and hurt its image so badly that while I understand that it has damaging effect, it is not serious. Newspapers are still very serious business for elite, for intellectuals, even for people like us, for our friends, for professors, for teachers, for a lot of other people, for international observers. They see newspapers very seriously and take them very seriously. My view is that we should equally examine newspapers as critically, although we may, because when we put them in comparison with television channels, we see them as doing wonderful job. But I don't think they're doing as wonderful a job as they should.
No, in fact, after the I'll just quickly wrap this up. After the ceasefire was announced or rather acknowledged by India, the next day most of newspapers had a breakdown of how it happened, who made the first call, who didn't, and everybody just ran with the source in the PMO. I think there was no effort to perhaps reach out to someone in US, just cross-check. You do have reporters in the US, right? So it's just one story, and I think they're very clear as to they just want to take this version. I was actually thinking while all of you were talking that we can perhaps count the newspapers in India who will perhaps try to do a story on what really happened to the Rafale jets, right? And perhaps a magazine like Caravan, or very, very few people will do. But even the lesser important things, which are actually very important, like bunkers. Actually, Nidhi and Anmol found that a lot of these bunkers, there's flooding. People are not able to go. Hospital doesn't have water. Simple ground stories about how people are suffering. In fact, when we put out a story about the twins who died, a lot of people were like, oh, really? Because we were never putting the name or the face to people who are dying in Kashmir. The Pahalgam victims, we knew every single person. We knew their families. Everybody was talking to TV. But we don't know the names of I think now around 18, 20 Kashmiris have died in the last few days. We don't know their names. So I'm thinking, who's going to report even that, which is not even highly problematic, right?
It's not just we don't know the names. We don't even mention the fact that people have died in the post Pahalgam,
They're just statistics.
Thing. Because Pahalgam, we can talk about the 26 who died because that is our casus belli, right? This is why we've gone to war or whatever. These deaths, we'd rather sweep it under the carpet because it's not really a feel-good thing to say.
The only thing I can say is that the bar for Indian journalism has come so low that people like me who only essentially write analysis, or people like Prem who write Substack, are seen as upholding journalism, where we are actually essentially doing very little journalism in that sense. Journalism is still being done by people like you, Scroll Wire, News Minute, News Laundry, and my colleagues at the Caravan. But I really sometimes laugh when people think of, like the bar is really low, and that's a sad that's a very sad state of affairs. On the military part, on the conflict part, just one point, because we didn't go down that path. I'm very worried about when the next escalation takes place and the next episode takes place, because it will start at a higher, rung of ladder of escalation, and because of the technological advancements like BrahMos, etc., that we have seen used this time, and the other Air Force uses, the space or the time for diplomatic intervention will be very less, and therefore we are looking at an even riskier scenario, which has been bred by this episode, because the ceasefire that we have seen in this episode is just a pause. It is not a reset of the escalation ladder like it was in 1999 during Kargil. And I think that is something we should be wary of. While I fully understand that ceasefire is a good thing, etc., we need to really push the envelope to a degree to make sure that the next episode does not happen, or if the next episode happens, then we are fully prepared to not let things completely go out of hand and get carried away emotionally.
Okay, so we come to an end of the discussion, but I'm going to quickly read out one or two letters because last week we could not. The first is from Srijata De. Srijata says, I truly appreciate and admire the work you're doing. Your podcast brings much needed nuance, depth, and thoughtful discourse. That said, I did want to share a small suggestion. I have noticed that when two topics are covered, the first often receives the bulk of the time, sometimes up to 1 hour, while the second tends to feel a bit rushed. To maintain the richness, please consider focusing on just one topic per episode, or extend duration for both.
We came from 3 to 2.
Yeah.
We used to have 3 before.
Yeah, I think we're just trying to figure out the formula each time, but some topics are to be discussed much more, right? Arvind Ravi says that he's happy that I asked the question at the end of last South Central, that if being faithful to government statements in war is bound to have flaws. However, the Swalpa Adjust Madi, which Nitin Pai said, who was there in the last South Central, it makes him think that he says it was sad to see Nitin dismiss anti-war sentiment as an idealistic philosophical narrative when it is debated. It is the reality on ground. Every civilian who's been killed during the attacks on either side, the grieving families of the soldiers are not being idealistic when they say that war brings destruction. Did Nitin say that?
I think he meant it in a slightly different context, though. I think he meant it from the point of view of what are India's options? What could India have done? Could you not have used the military force?
So the last letter is from Shrikanta, which I'm sure everybody will have an opinion. He says, it was reported that the government has blocked access to the Wire news page. While it is hugely concerning, the government has selectively shut down an independent news organization because of an obvious ideological disagreement. I wish TNM had also discussed what the Wire would have done better. The Wire was continuously interviewing experts from Pakistan in the name of impartial coverage. Was the Wire needed to be so generous in the hour of national crisis? Who can really do verification in an hour of war? The Wire sometimes comes across as a crude version of the right-wing stupidity.
I don't think the problem was interviews of people from the other side, from Pakistan, because Republic TV Times now, all of them had these caricatures coming from Pakistan too, right? In fact, that is far more dangerous because I don't think they represent a Pakistani perspective at all. In fact, the ones who were coming on Karan Thappar's show were well-informed people, editors or people who are experts in their own domain. And they brought a lot of sanity.
Servants.
Yeah, they brought a lot of sanity. It's important that we keep these conversations going. So, yeah.
Also, I would suggest that a time of crisis is precisely when we want nuanced voices from all sides of the spectrum. You don't just want cheerleaders for one side, whichever side.
And echo chambers, right?
Exactly. Okay, wait, hold on. He has criticism for the News Minute also. News Minute reported the response of the BBC India. This is on Power Trip, which is our political newsletter. We had given entire BBC response to the fact that they don't use the word terrorist. They use the word militants. Your coverage was not impartial. You had stated, however, BBC used the word. Basically, he's asking, why didn't TNM call out the BBC? First thing is,
what we did?
Yeah, because we did say that the BBC does use the word terrorist in some cases. Okay. It's not like they have a very uniform take. Like, for example, if you look at the London bomb blast, they have used the word terrorist. It's not like any of these media houses are beacons of being ethical, right? So, yeah, BBC has also faltered. But they are saying that when there is a political issue at hand, they do not use the word terrorist. Okay, I have actually one more letter. Pramod Biligiri writes, regarding discussion about Press Freedom Index on your podcast, I don't understand why you guys insist on calling some TV channels mainstream media. If they are owned by industrialists and politicians, as you say, and also they are not doing journalism, then they should be covered as deliberate political actors and not treated like errant children. If journalists like you don't consider them to be good sources of news, then why keep bringing them up? Or at least don't call them mainstream media. You people are the mainstream of our media today.
Oh,
what is the word which Kunal Kamra used?
Nice. But
yeah,
if you stopped naming, I mean, if you made a list of all these channels, and according to him, the ones that are owned by whatever, all of that, compromised media, and stopped referring to them as mainstream media, you do understand that we won't have a mainstream media.
He's saying we are.
You are. You and News Laundry, and one of the best things that's happened in recent times is, one, the fact that you guys have just not survived. You've got a brand new studio, all of that. But also that I think the one development in Indian media circles that I liked is the fact that you guys figured out that combining forces actually helps multiply the impact.
Yeah. There's a word which Kunal Kamra used, no? Lashkar-e-Media.
Noida.
Lashkar-e-Noida, he said for the channels.
But I like what he said, compromised media instead of saying mainstream media.
Delhi media is what I use.
But the rest are not any better, shades better here and there.
Yeah, actually compromise media is
we used to go with corporate sometimes, but I like CCM, compromise corporate media. Let's try that out.
We have a new word. Okay, now let's go to the recommendations. Pooja, what is yours?
So something completely away from what we discussed today, Anand Neelakantan. The reason I'm talking about him now, although I read his books many, many years ago, is because my colleague Sudeepto has interviewed him in What's Your Ism. So first do watch the interview of What's Your Ism. The link is in description. Then you may want to read his very popular books, Asura, The Rise of Kali, and Ajaya, I think. Very interesting perspectives, mythology retold, I think also from the anti-caste perspective. Feminism also here and there. So I found that interesting.
So my recommendation is essentially two books. One is from my Yale colleague Arne Westad about the great transformation of in China, how China developed and became this economic power, starting from the Mao era into what it has currently become. Arne Westad first went to China in the 1970s, knew Xi Jinping's father personally very well, understands Mandarin. So this is an arc. He's invited by the Chinese Communist Party. So this is almost like an authentic version of what happened in China, and not a journalistic version. The second book, which I really like, which I would like to recommend, is Careless People by Sarah Wine Williams. She worked at Facebook, and this is an inside account of all that has gone on at Facebook. She was a former New Zealand diplomat who solicited and got a job at Facebook. Now Facebook has tried to shut her up and not allowed her to be interviewed on at least US media, although elsewhere it has been covered. This is a really mind-blowing account, very nice to read and learn. Among one film which I can, because Air Force is so much in the news, Govind Nihalani in 1981 or 82 made a film for Shashi Kapoor called Vijeta. I don't think where it is available, but if anybody is interested in actually seeing a serious movie about military which talks about war in an objective manner and doesn't glorify war, and puts the individual and family in perspective, the tragedy, the loss, the wife, etc. Vijeta, starring Kunal Kapoor, Shashi Kapoor's son, produced by Shashi Kapoor, directed by Govind Nihalani, starring Om Puri, Supriya Pathak, Rekha playing Kunal Kapoor's mother in 1982, is quite a film I would recommend people to watch.
My recommendation, one is a book I'm rereading because of contemporary events. It's a book called Fighting to the End by Christine Fair. It is on the Pakistan Army. In one sense, it's a bit dated because it's about 10 years old. But what is interesting about that book is Christine is not looking at, a laundry list of what weapons they have or what their war strategy is. She's overall exploring one fundamental question. She says, if Pakistan has lost every war it has fought, the Pakistan Army has sponsored, funded, trained, enabled terrorism with nothing tangible to show for it. So the question is, why do they still keep doing it? And that is pretty much the fulcrum of Christine Fair's book. And like I said, I'm rereading it now. I'm halfway through it, and it's giving me a sort of cue to step back and look at what is the game plan, because otherwise, we're just seeing this as an episode in our history. This is a frame that I needed. Another book is by Robert Macfarlane. It's called Is a River Alive? Robert Macfarlane writes brilliantly on issues about the environment and related matters, and his use of language is particularly striking, and I love that. This book actually looks at that fundamental question: does a river have rights? Who guarantees these rights? What does that mean in actual terms? What is the nature of man's interaction with rivers? He also asked the question, when we say a river has rights and we give it a personality and all of that stuff, do we run the risk of ventriloquizing rivers? We are actually putting our thoughts into the river. And he uses three rivers. One is a river in Ecuador. One is actually two rivers in Chennai, which is the Coom and the Adyar, and also Ennore Creek. And the third is a river in Quebec. And each river brings a different aspect of this question to the problem. I'm supposed to give you two recommendations. Here's a bonus, but this is for the future. Mubi is about to stream Wong Kar-wai's 30-episode serial. The reason I thought of it, and I thought of it just now, is because I think one of the recommendations that Sushant gave us was about a book on China's transformation. this is a fictionalized, or at least, I mean, it's a Wong Kar-wai look at China's transformation. It looks at a young man whose origin story is during the period when China was behind the bamboo curtain, and then looks at his later years when China had exploded into a capitalist mindset. So, yeah.
I have two books from Srinath Raghavan to recommend because of the topic that we are discussing today. These are old ones of his: War and Peace in Modern India, A Strategic History of the Nehru Years, and also India's War, The Making of Modern South Asia by Srinath again.
I watched his interview recently. So my recommendation is very language specific. Only Malayalis can go and watch it. It's called Bye Bye Pass. It's a play that I went for. It's directed by Roshan, the film actor. Dhanya Rajendran stars in it, and Vaishak Shankar. A lot of other actors. Some from the movie industry, some from the theatre industry. It's 1 hour and 40 minutes, I think, but what a play. I haven't been so engrossed. I mean, I watch a lot of plays, but it's so engrossing. There's humor, there's tragedy, there's so much in that play. Okay, I will not spoil, no spoilers, but really, if it's coming to different cities, I think now it's only playing in Kochi. It's really worth watching, but I can't recommend that to non-Malayalis. Yeah.
But they should also come to Bangalore and other places.
I think they are trying to, yes. Okay, so that's all from us this week. Remember, we have 2 reporters in Jammu. They have been traveling to Rajouri, Poonch, etc., bringing you reports. None of this is possible without your support. So do take a subscription. It's not just something that I just say every week and you listen and you switch off, but do something about it. We definitely need media houses like News Minute, News Laundry, and so many others who will be on the ground telling you the ground stories. So I want to thank my producer Bhuvan Malik, production assistant Ajay R, editor Jasim Ali, and the ears for the show Maria Teresa Raju and Yana Choksi, who does our social media. Thank you very much, and thank you to the audience.